Good morning, good afternoon, maybe it's good evening. Hey there, it's Joshua Feinberg, and I want to very cordially welcome you to today's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, a dynamic weekly live stream show sponsored by DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. This series tackles the most pressing challenges that are faced by go-to-market, sales, marketing, product management, channel partnership, and customer success professionals in and around the data center industry. This week, we're going to look at 8 different questions that were sent in ahead of time. If you have any questions that you'd like us to consider for an upcoming show, make sure to leave them in the comments and we'll do our best to tackle those in upcoming weeks. So this week, we're going to start by talking about how to improve lead generation for data center channel strategy and partner ecosystem development. Then we'll shift gears and look at how you can improve data center prospecting and closing. Then we'll look at how you can market and sell sustainable data center power solutions and microgrids. And then we'll talk about how to build community with cloud, data center, and network infrastructure solution professionals. We'll take a short break, and then we'll come back and talk about how to grow data center market share relative to the overall competition in your marketplace. We'll look at how to build go-to-market GTM for data centers, how data center recruiters can improve what they do with new data center client acquisition, especially in and around colocation. And then we'll close out by talking about some marketing and sales tips that you can use for carrier-neutral data center services. So without any ado, let's jump right into the first question for today, which is, how can you improve lead generation for data center sales strategy and partner ecosystem development? This is a fantastic question. And I think a lot of people, when they're approaching this, first and foremost, need to take a reality check about what their position is in the marketplace, how big or small, and how well-known their brand is. And to put this in perspective, relatively early on in my career in the late 90s and early 2000s, I was a content provider for Microsoft's small business server, SBS product teams, and the Microsoft Direct Access channel partner teams. And I worked on a lot of projects around tools and partner enablement and how to build a professional services practice around Microsoft's small business server platform. And even at that time, a couple of decades ago, Microsoft was an extremely well-known brand in the marketplace, so it didn't have to work all that hard to create awareness and consideration among potential channel partners, among potential what at the time was value-added resellers, VARs, computer dealers, consulting firms. This was a little bit before the emergence of MSPs, managed service providers. If your company is relatively new to the marketplace and you don't have the brand name recognition of Microsoft or Google or Amazon or Meta or Rackspace or Cisco or Red Hat, like if you were relatively early on to building that up, it's super important that you think about how to build your channel strategy and how to approach partner enablement and partner ecosystem development from the standpoint of just like you would any other go-to-market challenge. First, start with an ideal client profile so you understand the companies that you want to attract into your channel partner ecosystem. Then second, define the buyer personas, the individual people within those channel partner accounts that are important for you to attract and engage with as potential partners. It's super important to recognize that now more than ever, most of the active research process that people go through, the buyer's journey that they go through, is self-propelled, meaning people are doing tons of research online, asking questions of Google and Bing and Siri and Alexa and Cortana and Copilot and GPT and Gemini, and they're watching webinars and live streams and podcasts and checking out review websites and asking their peers about what they think when they visit sites like LinkedIn and Twitter, X, Facebook, Reddit, what have you, Discord. All of these are ways that people are actively avoiding having to talk to a salesperson, having to talk to a channel account manager. So it's vital that you have a strategy to educate and build trust with people in that first 83% of their journey before they're going to be open to having a conversation with your channel account manager, with someone that's in charge of channel marketing or recruiting new partners. How do you do that? You build buyer personas so you understand what that channel partner's biggest goals are, what their biggest challenges are, what's frustrating them, what they need to get right. And then you develop content that helps them understand how they can reach their goals, how they can close their gaps, how they can overcome their challenges. And you use that content to attract them into you before they even know that your company exists. Now, this assumes that your company is relatively unknown and you don't have Microsoft or AWS or Google Cloud Platform. You don't have that massive brand recognition. If you do, then great. You don't have to work this hard. But if you don't, you're going to have an active strategy for it, attracting and engaging in the awareness and consideration stages of the journey before they're open to having a conversation. Now, it's also important not only to cover the full buyer's journey, the full partner journey that gets them signed up, is you have awareness and consideration and decision, and then you have post sign up. That's your onboarding, that's your channel enablement, and that's where you're training them similar to how you would a new sales hire or a new services hire, a new customer success hire, giving them access to tools and resources, letting them hear from other channel partners of yours that are already successful, other case studies that are already successful, and giving them continual reinforcement. But what's super important, if you're trying to generate leads for channel partners and build a partner ecosystem, to first educate and build trust with channel partners that probably don't know that your company exists yet. If they do know that you exist yet, well, that's great. You can go a little bit faster. But if they don't, it's really important to meet them where they are, teach them some helpful tips and strategies and best practices so they see you and your team as subject matter experts, trusted advisors, consultants, teachers, and not just another vendor trying to pitch them. That's the super important part of being able to tackle this in a way so you can improve your lead generation for your channel strategy and partner ecosystem development. The next question is, how can you improve your data center prospecting and your data center closing? What's most important about improving your prospecting and closing? I think it's really critical that you know who you're trying to prospect and what they care about. If you have the luxury of having product managers and product marketers on your team, they spend a lot of time figuring out user stories and figuring out the job to be done that your company actually does for a certain kind of ideal client profile and certain kinds of buyer personas. If you don't have the luxury of having a lot of product talent internally, someone still needs to wear that hat. Someone still needs to walk a mile or a kilometer or a marathon in the shoes of the buyers that you're trying to engage with. Understand what are their biggest goals and their objectives. What are their OKRs, the objectives and key results that they need to accomplish in the next 3 months? And how can you put content in front of them that helps them achieve their goals, that helps them knock out of the park what they do with their OKRs? What are their biggest challenges, their frustrations? What's keeping them up at 2:00 in the morning? What's forcing them to work lots of extra hours, nights and weekends, and take time away from their friends and family? What's stressing them out? Once you understand the consensus on that, you can also create amazingly helpful awareness stage and consideration stage content, ebooks, white papers, downloadable guides, webinars, live events, anything that you can do to educate and build trust with the particular buyer personas that you want to build awareness with. And if your company is relatively small, it's more important than ever that you prioritize your efforts. So not only will you likely have a couple of different buyer personas that you segment your prospects, that you segment your addressable market into, but it's also, everyone always tells parents, don't pick your favorite child, treat all your children equally. And that's great advice for parenting, but it's not great advice when it comes to segmenting your buyer personas. When it comes to segmenting your buyer personas, especially if you're a small resource constrained company, you need to designate your primary buyer persona, your secondary buyer persona, maybe a tertiary buyer persona, so you can prioritize efforts. Now, how do you prioritize efforts? It's usually, if you're a relatively new company, it's where the persona can monetize the best, what the best revenue and profitability opportunity is, and where you think you're going to have the best use cases, the best case studies, the best customer success outcomes with a particular segment. So once you do that, you're in a much better position to come up with content, come up with sales enablement materials that allow you to educate and build trust with certain segments at a time. And then it's also equally critical to recognize that in the marketplace that we're in right now, Gartner's found over and over and over again that like 80-90% of the buyer's journey, the last number I've seen is 80 There we go. Back on. So again, Gartner has found repeatedly, and many other analyst firms have come to similar conclusions, that nearly all of the buyer's journey, nearly all of the active research process that someone takes in between when they're a complete stranger to purchase can involve as many as a few dozen touch points. The latest number I've seen is 28 different touch points between when they first know that they have a goal that they're trying to achieve or a challenge they're trying to overcome and when they ultimately purchase. And in that same environment where so many journeys start on the smartphone, start by asking Google, Siri, Alexa, Cortana, ChatGPT, Copilot, someone a question, or asking a question on LinkedIn, or watching a video, or reading a review. All of this is a self-propelled journey, so much to the point now where the typical B2B buyer doesn't want to go anywhere near your sales team till they're 83% of the way through the buyer's journey. If you're into sports analogies, think about your company is sponsoring a football game or a baseball game, and you get this great suite to entertain prospective clients and existing clients. There's only one problem. The stadium staff has the same sales allergy that most other people do in the marketplace, and they have a policy where they don't allow sales activity to take place in that box before the game is 83% of the way over. And of course, that's a ridiculous analogy. You're spending thousands or tens of thousands of dollars to wine and dine these clients. Of course, they'll let you in. But imagine a scenario under which you were persona non grata. They don't want to allow anyone having to do with sales, maybe even marketing by extension, anywhere near that suite until the 8th inning of the baseball game or the 4th quarter of the basketball or football game. So that's kind of what's going on. So in order to have presence in the prospecting process, we need to figure out a way to be seen as educators, subject matter experts, teachers, and trusted advisors. So we can plant the seeds, we can frame the criteria and stay with prospects throughout the buyer's journey. Then we can use additional content and context about who they are and what they care about to accelerate and close much more efficiently, much more effectively on our own terms, more rapidly when it makes sense for both parties. But again, it starts from a very what's in it for them perspective as opposed to what's in it for me. I need to understand what you care about so I can provide value and make deposits into the relationship bank account before I try to push for the demo or push for the sales meeting. That mindset is super important for data center prospecting and closing in today's marketplace. Next question is, how can we market and sell sustainable data center power and networking solutions, and especially microgrids? So the question is basically, how can we build go-to-market? How can we build a marketing and sales playbook for power solutions and selling microgrids? And this is going to be a really hot area in the coming years as generative AI and GPT and NVIDIA chips that basically run so hot that they can melt. It's super critical. That's why liquid cooling is so hot right now. Anything having to do with sustainability, addressing shortfalls in grid power utility availability. Every single week, I'm talking to providers who are already thinking about what are they going to do when the utility company says no more. And there's talk of putting nuclear reactors in data centers to try to address some of these issues. There's talk about more panels, windmills, anything with sustainability. So given this environment, how can you market and sell? Well, it's super important to understand who your target audience is, to really have crisp clarity around the ideal client profile. What's the company? Where are they located? What's the company size? And what industry are they located in? What's their business model? In other words, really understand at a deep level who's the company that we're trying to sell our sustainable power solutions and microgrids to. And then within that company, who are the individual people? Who are the buyer personas, the semi-fictional representation of an ideal client that we're trying to build a relationship with over time so they become great prospects, great opportunities, and eventually highly satisfied clients? So the way we do that is we need to understand in those target accounts, and more than likely for large enough opportunities around power solutions and sustainability and microgrids, you more than likely are doing some kind of account-based selling, account-based marketing, where you have your top 100 accounts or your top 500 accounts you're targeting. And within those accounts, who are the stakeholders and what each of those stakeholders care the most about. This is what your product manager, your product management team will spend the most time on, but it's also, when it comes to your marketing and sales playbook, what you need to spend some time on understanding for each of those separate stakeholders. For starters, rank them, prioritize them. Who's the most important? Who's the second most important? Who's less important? Who perhaps is a negative buyer persona that may be interested in your content, but probably doesn't have a factor in the buying committee. So, and then once we understand each of those individual people, what do each of them care the most about? What is their biggest goal? What are their OKRs, their objectives and key results for the quarters? What are their biggest frustrations and challenges? What's causing them to miss out on vacation time? What's causing them to lose sleep? What's causing them to be really stressed out? Once you have consensus on each of those buyer personas' biggest goals and each of those buyer personas' biggest challenges, our entire marketing and sales playbook, especially early on in the journey when they're not ready to talk with your sales team, needs to focus on our company being seen as thought leaders, subject matter experts, trusted advisors, teachers, and consultants about the consensus on each of those personas' biggest goals, each of those personas' biggest challenges. And the better job we can do that with extreme empathy towards teaching and framing the criteria and guiding them and staying with them throughout the buyer's journey, not just showing up at the tail end, because if you just show up at the tail end, you're going to end up with RFP, request for proposal, request for quote, and the only thing that's going to win at that point. You will not have built up the brand loyalty, the brand recognition, and the relationship equity that you'll need to be able to close sales on terms that make sense, that are profitable for your company. So the most important thing when it comes to power solutions, when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to microgrids, is to have a really strong handle on who the company is and who the key people are in that company that care most about these issues. And most of all, what's keeping them up at 2 o'clock in the morning, what's causing them to miss out on time away from their friends and family, what's stressing them out, and what do they need to do right to get a promotion, to move up to the next level, to achieve the goals. And once you have consensus on that, it's far easier to come up with a marketing and sales playbook that provides value to your prospects and opportunities and clients, as opposed to just a selfish, constant nagging of them to bug them for, hey, when can we do a 10-minute get acquainted meeting? Or when can I pitch you about our wonderful award-winning power solutions and microgrids? It needs to be focused so much more about what they care about and a lot less about, because they're not going to care about your solutions, they're not going to care about your microgrids, they're not going to care about any of that sustainability till they feel that they can trust you. And the way to get that trust is to start with education and providing value to them. Next question is, how can you build community with cloud providers, data center providers, network infrastructure providers, and professionals? How can you build community across those different kinds of business models, across those different segments within the broader information technology industry? Well, it starts with understanding who the companies are, the consensus on the companies, what makes them similar versus what makes them different. And then within those companies, what are the teams and who are the individual people within those teams? And once you have a strong handle on the broad category of cloud versus data center versus network, and you understand the teams that comprise the business within that, and then the people within those teams, it's a lot easier to find the common ground, to find the community. And this is something that media companies, events companies spend a lot of time on. If you think about a major conference for cloud, or a major conference for data center, or a major conference for network infrastructure, there's typically broad keynotes that bring everyone in the session together. And then there's individual tracks for individual types of companies and individual kinds of roles. And the reason they segment it is because it can be really difficult over a 2, 3, 4-day conference to find topics that everyone cares about. So they try to find broad universal things that all 5,000 or 10,000 or a few hundred or however big the conference is that everyone cares about. And then they focus on delivering value at a much more granular level. Because remember, we live in a world where everyone gets everything what they want 100% on their terms immediately. If you talk to people that are nearing the end of their careers, that are like baby boomers, they remember a time where you turned on the TV and there was a handful of different things to watch, or maybe even fewer. If you talk to people that are in the early stages of their career, like Gen Z or even people 10, 20 years into their career, millennials, they have grown up in a world. So it's super important to know who your buyer personas are and what they care about, because when you're looking to build community, you really need to find common ground. If you're inviting 500 people into the room and there's 87 different careers and industries in there, it's much more difficult to build community. If you're bringing groups in where you can see yourself drawing a Venn diagram and you can for sure see the overlap between what cloud cares about and what data center cares about and what network infrastructure cares about, it's much easier to find that common ground and build community, regardless of whether we're talking about an online community like a LinkedIn group or a Facebook group or Discord or Reddit or something like that, whether we're talking about a virtual event, whether we're talking about a multi-day conference, whether we're talking about mastermind groups. It's super important to figure out what they have in common. So it's defining the personas, it's defining their biggest goals, their biggest challenges. In most cases, the community business models, the events, the media companies will very often have advisory councils, because many times the leadership of the company come from the media or the events world, and they have some background or exposure in this industry, but it's not nearly as powerful as the consensus of going out and recruiting 5, 10, 15 or more advisors to serve on your group that provide steering on the topic calendars, the editorial focus when it comes to conferences, as individual proposals come in for speakers at the conferences, evaluating the individual person before they decide to put them on the conference website or in the virtual brochure. And then as you get closer to the event, the one that's the group that's looking at the slides to make sure that the speaker is going to provide enough value to the session so that conference attendees feel like it was worthwhile to come to that particular session at that particular conference. So when it comes to community, when it comes to building community across cloud providers, data center providers in and around the data center industry and network infrastructure, the single most important thing is to have extreme empathy for understanding what each of those groups, each of those people within those groups care most about, and providing a ton of value that unites them across the board. So we have 4 more questions that we're going to cover in the Q&A for data center, go-to-market sales and marketing today. But before we do that, let's take a quick break.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales marketing and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com. Now, back to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A.
Yeah, these are fantastic questions today. Really enjoying the questions talking about channel partner ecosystems and targeting energy and sustainability, talking about building community across different segments in and around the data center ecosystem, and the importance of building a prospecting and closing and playbook that's very centered around providing value. So the next question today that we're going to tackle is how to grow data center market share above and beyond the average in the marketplace for growth. So in other words, you've determined that for your particular business model, your particular industry, in the countries and the regions that you do business with, that you've sized up your competition and you've determined that they're growing X amount per year. And you want to figure out how to above average that trend to make your board members satisfied, to make your shareholders as satisfied as possible, the industry analysts, all the individual stakeholders that are going to care about watching that. And naturally, if your company is large and like a publicly traded REIT or a real estate investment trust company, or you're a publicly traded technology or facilities company or construction related company in this space, it's even more important than ever to figure out how you're going to grow faster than the industry. But what this really starts from is understanding what the other player, for starters, understanding what business you're actually in. So if we put our product manager hat on for a few moments, think about the job to be done. What job, and this goes back to the late Clayton Christensen from Harvard Business School, what job are your clients hiring your company to do? And when they do that, what are they explicitly or implicitly firing the alternative to that job that you actually do for your company? A lot of companies don't actually know what business they're really in. But if you wanted to be able to grow above the rate of marketplace growth, it first starts by having a deep intuitive understanding about why people hire your particular product or service or solution compared to all the other options that are in the marketplace. Once you understand that, it can be a lot easier for you to have a product roadmap that meets that, and to get clarity around your ideal client profile and get clarity around who your buyer personas are and how to prioritize each of those buyer personas. And then it becomes a matter of studying what the marketplace is doing on the product side, on the customer success side, with onboarding and retention and expansion, and working backwards from customer success to sales and what's going on. What can make your sales process more delightful? What can make people happier? What can be better about managing expectations and building loyalty? And then working backwards from that, what needs to be baked into your sales enablement and marketing playbooks? At a high level, what I'd encourage you to be thinking about in these times going forward is, now that we have such a self-propelled, self-driven buyer's journey, we're like 80, Gartner pegs this at 83%. Where 83% of the researching and comparing options and comparing pricing now happens before sales contact, before vendor contact. Now we're in that world where so much of the research is self-propelled. It's more important than ever that we realign our teams around that. So what I find when I do consultations with individual companies is I'm advising that marketing needs to go deeper into the buyer's journey than they've ever gone before, and sales needs to come back earlier in the buyer's journey than they've ever had to do before. So the reality is there's this convergence among what was traditionally considered marketing and what was traditionally considered sales development and what was traditionally considered being an account executive. All of these three worlds really need to re-roll together and provide value as early as possible to your primary buyer persona, so you are grabbing them in by the virtual shirt collar and educating them and building trust with them around their biggest goals, their biggest challenges, helping them think through their plans long before they even know that your company exists to go look for your company or your solutions category. We need to intercept them as early as possible so we can be the ones doing the teaching, so we can be the ones framing all the criteria. Because if we don't do that, someone else is going to, another company is going to, and whoever lands first is the one that's going to build the most loyal prospects, the most loyal clients, and have the best opportunities, the most efficient process, the best unit economics. And that's the one that's going to grow above market. So we need to understand, again, at a deep level, what it is that we're being hired to do. We need to understand just how real this B2B self-propelled buyer's journey is. And we need to realign our whole go-to-market team around intercepting prospects as early as possible in the journey, so that they see our company, our teams, and our individual people within the teams as teachers, as trusted advisors, as subject matter experts, and thought leaders. Because it's only when we achieve that we're able to get the trust that we're going to need to stay with them throughout the journey, and to be able to command premium pricing and accelerate sales processes. And all of that is extremely important to being able to grow at an above market rate in today's data center industry. Next question is, how can we build go-to-market for data centers? How do we build a go-to-market playbook for data centers in today's world? Well, one of the most important parts of being able to do this is understanding where your company can win, and not just win the initial sale, but where it's going to win on retention, where it's going to win on expansion, where it's going to win on case studies and loyalty, so that your existing clients are a powerful growth engine around both traditional word of mouth and digital word of mouth. So we need to be very real about this because, for example, for a lot of smaller co-location providers where there's a single location, there is typically a finite limit size-wise on the sophistication level of the kind of client who's a really good fit for you. For a small single location co-location provider that maybe has a few dozen employees, you're often going to find that you win best where there's local proximity or someone places an extreme premium on that local proximity above other factors. As you move into larger companies where they care about latency, where they care about fault tolerance, it often becomes necessary to scale beyond that single location to having resources co-located in other larger providers' facilities, and perhaps even start growing through mergers and acquisitions to grow the size of your footprint. But it's really important to be extremely self-aware about where your company is going to win on the customer success front, where you're going to get the best case studies, where you're going to get the best review, where you're going to get the best digital word of mouth, because that's an extremely important part of being able to build effective go-to-market today. And I'm using an example with co-location, but this could easily apply to hyperscale. This could apply to wholesale. This could apply to edge and modular, and even beyond operators. This can apply to technology companies that are in and around the data center industry, facility solutions in and around the data center industry, construction, real estate, even marketing and sales providers that sell to the data center industry. It's super important to understand what you do really well and what you don't do so well, so you can double down on what's working and do less of what's not. And that, if you have the luxury of having one or more people on your team that are in charge of your product roadmap and how you develop products and your solution engineering and everything like that, you probably talk about these things a lot. If you don't have that luxury, somebody needs to wear that hat and be thinking strategically about where you can win. And that's what should inform your whole go-to-market playbook, is where you can have the most efficient onboarding, the most efficient expansion, the happiest clients, and then work backwards on all of that and think about how your account executive, your sales development, your marketing, how they all collaborate together so they can get found as early as possible in the journey, so they can educate and build trust with the right people in the right places at the right time and in the right context. And what I find myself talking about very, very often is that the sales professional in today's journey, and a self-driven journey, needs to present themselves more like a big four consultants and less like a traditional sales rep for a traditional IT vendor. And the customer success manager, the customer success rep, needs to look like the PhD or the MBA version of the big four consultants. Then and only then, where it feels like your sales process and your onboarding process, and your expansion process feels more like free consulting and less like a pitch, then and only then do you start to have the leverage that you need to be successful with your GTM. So what that means by definition is your CS is almost certainly getting involved in a lot more sales processes than it ever did before. And your sales, your account executives, your sales development should be involved pretty early on in the buyer's journey. In a lot of ways, your AEs, your account executives, your sales development, your SDRs are coming much earlier on in the journey, closer to the 0, 10, 20% point of the journey. And your marketing team is also going much later into the journey, because where we need to educate and build trust with complete strangers long before they know that our company exists and our solution category exists is more important than ever for the whole GTM to be seen as experts, thought leaders, trusted advisors, and teachers. That's the way to build an effective GTM go-to-market playbook for today's marketplace. Next question is, how do data center recruiters improve what they do with new client acquisitions, specifically in and around co-location providers, co-location operators? So what can data center recruiters do to be more successful with new clients that are principally involved in the co-location business? So recruiters, much like people have been declaring for 10 years that email marketing is going to go away and there's things that are going to supplant traditional social media, people have been predicting for a long time that recruiters were in the third and fourth quarter of the game, or the eighth or ninth inning of the baseball game. And the reality is, as long as there are still shortages of talent that are incredibly strategic for particular companies, there's still going to be a huge value for recruiters. And in the data center industry in particular, you wouldn't see so many grassroots movements around recruiting into the data center industry if there wasn't still chronic shortages of this. And this is something that's been around a long time. I remember when I started going to data center industry conferences in the mid 2010s, and I talked to baby boomers about this, and I looked around the room and realized that, I was kind of towards the middle of my career, and I'm one of the younger people, and everyone was starting to recognize that this was a big issue. So there's some great grassroots movements around trying to get high school students and college students and even elementary and middle school students excited about career opportunities in data centers. And to that extent, there's still very much a place for recruiters. The challenge for recruiters is, instead of being seen as an intermediary, they need to position themselves as experts on recruiting and retention and building world-class teams, which means the recruiters need to be seen as teachers and trusted advisors and consultants and thought leaders, way more than just a headhunter, way more than just a recruiter. And the best way to do that is to get super crisp on your addressable market, on your ideal client profile, on your target account list, and who are the key people in each of these co-location providers that you need to build a relationship with. Once you've identified who the key people are, whether it's a CEO, a CTO, a head of HR, and you've ranked them, you've prioritized them, then once you have a primary buyer persona and a secondary buyer persona, figure out the consensus on the goals and the challenges that each of those personas are currently up against. What do they need to achieve in their jobs to get a promotion? What's frustrating the heck out of them and causing them to lose sleep and give up nights and weekends and get all stressed out? Once you have the consensus on that, you need to create a content strategy to intercept those people virtually through the shirt collars as they're scrolling through as early as possible, so that you, as the recruiter, are seen as the teacher and the expert, and not just somebody that's trying to get them to take a meeting with them. And the better job you can do them with intercepting them as early as possible and building that relationship, the more likely it is that you're implanting into their brain that you are the only one to go to. For sure, you'll be on the short list, but if you do this right, you may be the short list. So the key thing for a data center recruiter that wants to improve the new client acquisition and co-location is you need to be an expert on the data center co-location business model, and specifically all of the job roles, what an HR person does, and all the frustrations that a CEO and a CTO is facing around recruiting and retaining the talent that they need to take their company up to the next level. Once you can do that and start to articulate that in video content and audio content, in webinars, podcasts, being a little meta here, the better job that you can do with that, the easier it is for the most important stakeholders in these co-location companies to see you as the go-to expert, as opposed to just another vendor. So that's the key way for data center recruiters to improve what they do with new client acquisitions, specifically in and around co-location. And the final question that we'll be taking today has to do with just carrier-neutral data centers, carrier-neutral data center services, and what we can do for more effective marketing and sales enablement for carrier-neutral data center services. Well, it's really important to understand, is carrier-neutral the distinguishing factor among your data centers? If you have product managers, if you have a VP of product, if you have a chief product officer, have you validated that carrier neutral is the distinguishing, differentiating factor that brings potential clients to your virtual doorstep, to your tours, that gets them excited about onboarding and staying with your company for years? If it is, great. Because if that's the case, if we know that that's the job to be done, that we're actually performing for that particular client, then we want to build our entire marketing and sales enablement engine, sales development engine, around the carrier neutral part of our company. We want to talk about our meet rooms, all the different telecommunications providers that we bring in, what that competition does for uptime, what it does for speed, what it does for competition. And one of the most effective ways to do that is you can explain it out to your heart's content. But if you have clients that are willing to come on a podcast or come on a webinar and let you interview them about why they picked your particular carrier neutral data center and how they evaluated the other alternatives and what some of their biggest criteria was and how they went through this. And you can use that content, co-marketing, those content collaborations with key stakeholders. It's a beautiful thing because they're becoming an extension of your marketing and sales engine. But let's assume that you've validated that carrier neutral is the primary reason that people sign on with your company. Then you want to build your whole go-to-market playbook, your content strategy, your sales enablement strategy, your sales process, your webinars, your YouTube videos, all that stuff, your LinkedIn content around educating and building trust at the intersection of what those stakeholders care most about and your carrier neutral data center services. So then it becomes a strategic exercise in defining your ideal client profile, defining the buyer personas within that ideal client profile, prioritizing the buyer personas within that ideal client profile, so you know who's your most important, second most important, third most important stakeholder. Maybe there's a negative buyer persona where you put the choice on a drop-down list because you're never going to be successful with that kind of person, and you don't want to waste a lot of time on your sales team's part. And if you're doing outbound using LinkedIn Sales Navigator or ads with LinkedIn Campaign Manager, you can do things with exclusions to make sure you're not wasting time with that. But once you understand who the companies are on your target account list and who the people are to prioritize within those accounts, then you can get consensus on their goals and their challenges and build a whole playbook around educating and building trust with those stakeholders around the consensus biggest goals that they have, their objectives and key results, and the biggest challenges and frustrations that they have. And the more you're able to be seen as teachers, trusted advisors, subject matter experts, thought leaders, the easier it is for you to effectively build a marketing and sales playbook for your carrier neutral data center services, for your carrier neutral data center locations. But it starts with being really, really self-aware about who your company is, where they win, what provides the most success to your clients, and then working backwards from a product and a customer success standpoint to who you want to attract more of, who you want to clone, how do you get more clients just like your most successful clients. So that's the key, assuming the carrier neutral is the big part of what makes your data center's secret sauce, what makes your consistently win. And then, of course, you need to be thinking a little bit forward as well. You need to be talking about what's on the roadmap for the next several months, what's on the roadmap for the next couple of years, so that you're thinking ahead, because we know, especially among like co-location and wholesale, there's a multi-year time frame involved in all of this. So we need to be thinking with our marketing and sales enablement, sales development, our pipeline generation. We need to be thinking with that time frame as well. So those are the key considerations to think about when it comes to the marketing and sales enablement strategy for carrier neutral data centers. So I'm so glad that you were able to join us today for the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, and we look forward to seeing you back again next time.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales marketing and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com.